There's a version of every story that makes sense at first. The official version, the easy version, the one people accept and move on from. But when you start pulling it apart, piece by piece, you begin to see how it was built. Every choice, every moment, every detail, like bricks laid one at a time. And when you look closer, things start to shift. Details don't line up, motives get complicated, and the truth isn't as clean as it seems. This is Killer Constructions, and this is a story that deserves a closer look. A note before we continue. This episode discusses the loss of a young mother and her toddler son in harrowing circumstances. The details involve violence and a child's recovery from water. If that feels too heavy right now, it's okay to step away. For those staying, we'll move forward with care. Picture a quiet apartment complex on the edge of St. Petersburg, Florida, Lincoln Shores, 4th Street North. It's the kind of place where families come and go, where the hum of daily life fills the air, children playing outside, cars pulling in after work, neighbors nodding and passing. Number 11601, a second floor unit. On March 29th, 2023, that apartment held a celebration, a 21st birthday gathering, balloons perhaps, laughter, music drifting through the open windows into the warm Florida evening. Pashun Jeffery, 20 years old, was hosting it for the father of her child, Thomas Mosley, her partner, the man she had shared her life with for years. Their 2-year-old son Talon was there too, part of the joy. It was supposed to be a milestone, a marker of adulthood, a night to remember. But by the next morning, that same apartment would become something else entirely. A secured scene marked off with yellow tape. Evidence on the sidewalk, a family searching desperately for answers. And out in the waters of Lake Maggiore, a discovery no one could have anticipated. This is the story of how a birthday gathering gave way to unimaginable loss. How one night shifted the foundation of 2 lives and took 3. We will build it piece by piece. Starting from the beginning, Pashun Nakia Jeffery grew up in St. Petersburg. The kind of young woman who held things together. She was 20, a mother focused on her son. Friends described her as vibrant, the type who lit up a room. She worked jobs that kept the lights on, retail shifts, whatever it took. By early 2023, she and Thomas Mosley were living together in that Lincoln Shores apartment. They had Talon, their toddler, full of energy, just learning to navigate the world. Photos show a boy with wide eyes and a ready smile, dressed in little outfits, playing on the floor. Pashun posted about him often on social media, pride in every update. She captured moments of him stacking blocks, his small hands grasping at toys, the everyday triumphs of early childhood. Those images painted a picture of devotion, of a mother building a stable world for her boy amid the uncertainties of young adulthood. Her post carried a quiet determination, snapshots of park outings, bath time giggles, first steps celebrated with heart emojis. It was the portrait of a life in motion, carefully constructed day by day. Thomas James Mosley Jr. was 21 that spring, born and raised in Pinellas County not far from the apartment. His path had been uneven from the start, marked by a series of small failures that compounded over time. His mother, Renee Mosley, would later tell a courtroom about his childhood in measured detail. 3 elementary schools in Pinellas County, because learning did not stick the way it did for others. Behavioral challenges surfaced early, disruptions in class, difficulty focusing, moments where he withdrew completely. He repeated 3rd grade twice, each time hoping for a reset that never fully took hold. Homeschooling at 16 was an attempt to tailor the environment to him, but it did not hold. He quit altogether at 18, stepping away from formal education without a diploma. Jobs were fleeting, each one a brief experiment that ended in frustration. A seasonal role as a bathroom attendant at Tropicana Field during baseball season, gone after a few months. A city waste management position that lasted one day. He walked off because he did not like a coworker's attitude. The tension too much to bear. Loud noises set him off, echoing in his head long after they faded for others. Bright lights overwhelmed him, turning simple tasks into ordeals. He fixated on objects with an intensity that puzzled those around him, like the time he sat on a sidewalk staring at his motionless scooter for hours, unmoving, lost in whatever pulled his attention. Signs, his family said, of something deeper. Autism spectrum traits, perhaps. Strong reactions to being told what to do. A resistance that built walls where bridges might have formed. By his late teens, the struggles mounted into crises. 2 suicide attempts before 20, each one pulling him into the emergency system. Involuntary mental health holds both times. Baker acts in Florida, where authorities evaluate and stabilize before release. He was sent for assessment, medicated if needed, counseled briefly, then returned to the rhythm of life with passion and tailing. No long-term oversight followed, no mandated therapy or support structure to catch the next fall. They were young parents navigating it all, bills stacking up, diaper changes through the night, the push and pull of a relationship under the weight of responsibility. Arguments likely flared in private, as they do in so many young households, over money or parenting or the future. No one outside their circle saw the cracks widening. Friends at the birthday gathering later told police it felt normal, celebratory, not yet. March 29th falls on a Wednesday. Evening approaches in St. Petersburg, the air thick with the promise of spring warmth. The sun dips low over the flat Florida landscape, casting long shadows across the parking lot at Lincoln Shores. Palm trees sway gently, fronds rustling in the breeze. Inside the apartment, preparations for the gathering take shape, Passion putting out food on a table, plates of snacks, perhaps a cake with 21 candles, bottles of drinks chilling, inviting friends or family over, texts pinging back and forth. Thomas arrives, the man of the hour, stepping into the space filled with goodwill. 21. Legal adulthood in every sense. The group gathers in the living room, chairs pulled close, voices overlapping. Laughter fills the space, bouncing off the walls. Talon toddles around at knee level, part of the energy, reaching for a balloon or giggling at the attention. Witnesses would later confirm it to authorities. A normal celebration. No raised voices cutting through the noise. No tension spilling over into awkward silences. It wraps up sometime after 8 in the evening, guests hugging goodbye, promising to connect soon. The door closes. The apartment quiets, settling into the night. Around 8:42 that night, surveillance footage captures Thomas Mosley leaving the apartment. He walks to his sport utility vehicle in the lot, gets in, drives away. Not far. South toward Lake Maggiore, a sprawling body of water on the northwest side of the city, its dark surface reflecting the last light of day. He does not go home to the lake area immediately. Instead, he ends up at his mother's house, about 10 blocks inland from the shore. Past 9 o'clock, he appears in the doorway with severe cuts on his hands and arms, bloodied clothing, pain etched on his face. Renee sees him, the sight jolting her into action. She calls for help, 911, voices urgent in the background. He is rushed to St. Anthony's Hospital, just a few miles away. Doctors note the wounds in their report, deep lacerations consistent with slippage during a struggle involving a blade, the kind of injuries where the hand slides down the handle, cutting the user as much as the target. Defensive, perhaps, if he was protecting himself, or offensive, if control slipped in the heat of it. He does not explain much to the staff, just endures the stitches, the questions hanging unanswered. Meanwhile, back at Lincoln Shores, all is silent through the night and into the next morning. Pashun's family tries to reach her on Thursday, March 30th. A FaceTime call goes unanswered, the screen dark. Texts begin to pile up, read but no reply. Worry builds like a slow tide. They drive over mid-morning, tires crunching on the asphalt, pull up to the apartment. Traces of blood on the sidewalk catch their eye first, dark streaks dried in the sun, leading toward the door like a trail. They knock, call her name, no answer. Panic sets in, sharp and immediate. Management is called, keys fumbling at the lock. The door unlocks. What they find inside is chaos frozen in time. A very violent scene, as the arrest report would later describe it with clinical precision. Blood everywhere, pooled on tile floors, smeared on walls in handprints or arcs from movement. Furniture overturned, a chair on its side, cushions askew. Signs of a struggle that started somewhere in the living room and moved through the space, knocking over lamps, scattering toys. Pashun Jeffery on the floor, lifeless, struck more than 100 times with a sharp weapon. Overkill, the kind that speaks to uncontrolled force or desperation. Wounds clustered on her torso, neck, limbs, defensive injuries on her arms and hands. Cuts where she raised them to block, fingers reaching in a final effort. But Talon is gone. No sign of the toddler anywhere in the apartment. The 2-year-old vanished sometime in the night, leaving only absence. Authorities swarm the scene within minutes. Police tape goes up, sealing the building. Crime scene technicians in gloves and booties move methodically, photographing every angle, swabbing surfaces. An Amber Alert goes out statewide for Talon Mosley, his description flashing on screens, 2 years old, curly hair, last seen in pajamas. Drones lift off from the parking lot, buzzing overhead for aerial views. Helicopters circle wider, spotlights cutting the gathering dusk. A bloodhound from Manatee County Sheriff's K-9 unit is brought in. The handler walking the dog through the apartment, nose to the ground. It picks up a scent, pulls toward the bedroom. Under a bed, investigators find a bloody cleaning bottle, cap off, liquid spilled. A fingerprint lifts off it cleanly, Thomas Mosley's. It matches records instantly. Irrefutable. The dog's trail leads out the door, toward the parking lot, then south. The search pushes south along that path. Lake Maggiore, its waters deceptively calm under the afternoon sun. Del Holmes Park on the northwest shore, a spot for picnics and fishing, now crawling with boats. Around midday Thursday, a report comes in over police radio, something in an alligator's mouth. Spotted by a fisherman, divers move in fast, splashing into the murky water. They recover the remains of a small child, Talon, 2 years old. The official cause later determined is drowning. But the positioning, the timing, questions linger immediately. How did he end up there, in the shallows, placed in the water with an alligator drawn to the disturbance? Mosley, still in the hospital under guard, becomes the sole focus. His sport utility vehicle is found crashed into the Gulf of Mexico nearby, just a short drive from the lake. Investigators believe he had driven it off a boat ramp at Maximo Park in the early hours, tires spinning in sand, before plunging into the surf. Abandoned there, windows down, engine cold. He had swum away, then appeared later at his mother's. The timeline tightens like a vice. The gathering ends around 8. He leaves at 8:42, captured on camera. Somehow the route bends toward the lake. Talon ends up in the water. He arrives at his mother's with fresh cuts. The vehicle ends up in the Gulf. The pieces start to connect, each one locking into place. By Friday, March 31st, he is arrested in his hospital bed, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The state attorney files notice seeking the death penalty within days, signaling the gravity of what prosecutors believe happened. The arrest report lays it out cold and methodical. The fingerprint on the cleaning bottle, the matching wounds on his hands, the path from apartment to lake to gulf, the absence of any forced entry at Lincoln Shores, no broken windows, no damaged lock. Pashun had either let the person inside or the person was already there. The birthday gathering hangs over it all, the last normal moment before silence. But the structure does not hold that simply once the defense begins laying its own foundation. Mental health quickly moves to the center. Competency to stand trial becomes the first major question. 6 months after the arrest, in September of 2023, a judge rules Mosley incompetent based on evaluations and sends him to a state hospital for treatment. Medication, observation, repeated assessment. Months later, he is returned to the Pinellas County Jail. Improved enough to continue under review, but still not fully resolved. Hearings stretch through 2024 and into 2025. By the summer of that year, another round of evaluations is underway. Psychologist Ohiana Torielde is appointed in March to assess him. Her report is delayed by scheduling problems and poor communication, a frustration that spills into open court. Judge Susan St. John orders compliance and keeps the case moving. Testimony comes in gradually. Renee Mosley takes the stand first, voice steady through tears. His brother follows. An autism specialist waits to explain behaviors that his family says marked him from childhood. Inside the Pinellas County Justice Center, the room fills with pauses, long ones. Renee swallowing hard as she describes the overreactions that defined her son's life. The fixations that pulled him away from the world. The jobs that slipped through his hands one after another. He just had a different way of learning, she tells the court. Signs of spectrum disorder are woven through the account. Sensitivity to noise that made workplaces unbearable. Light that triggered overload. Authority figures who sparked resistance or shutdown. The defense builds it brick by brick. Was he capable of understanding the charges against him? Was he able to consult with counsel in a meaningful way? Could he take part in his own defense at all? Prosecutors push back hard. The violence was deliberate, they argue, not a blur of incapacity. More than 100 sharp force injuries delivered with force and repetition. A child placed in the water. Actions afterward that suggest awareness. They want the possibility of death row preserved, pointing to aggravating factors under Florida law, including the age of the child and the nature of the attack. The competency hearing stretches across weeks in the summer of 2025. Closing arguments loom by August. No trial date is set. Everything remains suspended on the question of whether he is legally fit to face what comes next. Now step back from the rush of those days. Consider the apartment again in daylight. The blood on the sidewalk, baked dry by the sun, streaks pointing inward. The cleaning bottle under the bed, its contents used in what may have been a rushed attempt to wipe something down, but not enough to erase the print. Mosley's cuts, the kind that can happen when a handle grows slick and the grip fails. He leaves after the gathering, drives south. What unfolded in those hours between his departure and his arrival at his mother's house remains unwitnessed by anyone now alive. Taylin ends up in Lake Maggiore, recovered hours later. Pashun is left fighting in her home. Her injuries telling a story of resistance. No confession fills the gap, only evidence. Pashun's family grieves publicly, channeling shock into ritual. Vigils at Lake Maggiore draw dozens. White balloons released for Taylin under gray skies. Candles glowing along the shoreline. Questions surface in interviews about custody tensions, prior arguments, the pressure of young parenthood in a cramped apartment. Mosley's family speaks more cautiously, emphasizing illness and instability rather than intent. The alligator becomes one of the most haunting details in the case. But it is only one detail. Did it reach Talon after he was already in the water? Was the child placed there first? The bloodhounds trail south. The vehicle in the surf. Each element becomes another brick in the wall of the prosecution. Florida's justice system moves slowly in death penalty cases because it has to. Competency must be resolved first. If a defendant cannot understand the proceedings or help counsel, trial cannot move forward. If competency is restored, the case enters a new phase. Jury selection, forensic testimony, medical examiners, timelines, expert witnesses, mitigation, aggravation. Every inch of the structure tested. Mosley's wounds could be read one way by the state and another by the defense. Panic, awareness, self-preservation, cover. The birthday gathering recedes into the past, but it remains the anchor point in the chronology, the last visible moment before everything fractured. As of April 2026, the case remains unresolved. Hearings continue. No verdict has been reached. No trial has begun. The apartment is now only a place on a map, but for the families involved, it is still a wound with walls around it. Lake Maggiore still reflects the same sun. Traffic still moves on 4th Street North. The city keeps going. Justice, however, builds slowly, piece by piece. Expand the view outward and the story becomes even harder to simplify. St. Petersburg is not unfamiliar with tragedy, but this case struck a deeply personal nerve. A young mother harmed inside the home where she cared for her child. A toddler recovered from nearby water. A father charged. A family asking for mercy through the language of illness. Another asking for accountability through the language of evidence. And underneath all of it, the question that hovers over so many cases like this one. Were there warning signs? And if there were, what did they mean at the time? Investigators would later reconstruct the apartment through blood patterns, movement, and the placement of items across the rooms. The physical evidence suggested motion through the space rather than a single static point of attack. A struggle. Defensive wounds on Pashun's hands and arms indicated that she tried to protect herself. The sheer number of injuries suggested repeated force over a span of time, not one brief burst. Talon's recovery in the lake added another layer investigators had to account for. Medical findings pointed to drowning, but how he entered the water and in what exact condition remained part of the broader theory, built from surrounding evidence rather than from a witness who saw it happen. Hospital documentation added another piece. The cuts on Mosley's hands and arms were significant. To investigators, that mattered. Injuries like that can happen in close contact with a blade, especially when the grip fails. Prosecutors saw those wounds as consistent with the violence inside the apartment. The defense could point to the same injuries and ask different questions. What state of mind was he in? Was there an episode? Was there a break from reality? Could someone behave with purpose in one moment and total dysfunction in the next? In a case like this, the legal process does not move simply on horror. It moves on proof. That is part of what makes this case so haunting. Not just the facts, but the way those facts have to be arranged. Surveillance footage, fingerprint evidence, hospital treatment, search efforts, recovery from the water, competency evaluations, family testimony. None of it exists in isolation. Each detail leans against the next. Remove one brick and the structure shifts. Add another and the weight changes. Renee Mosley's testimony about her son's life adds a difficult tension to the case. It does not erase the allegations. It does not soften what prosecutors say happened, but it complicates the picture. A child struggling in school, a teenager leaving education behind, a young adult drifting from one short-lived job to another. suicide attempts, mental health holds, family members recognizing patterns. They did not know how to name early enough. The courtroom becomes the place where all of that history is dragged forward and measured against the devastation of one night. And then there's Pashun, whose life can easily get flattened in the shadow of the investigation if the story is not handled carefully. She was not just the victim in a headline. She was a young woman building an ordinary life under pressure, working, parenting, posting the little moments that make up a child's early years, caring enough to host a birthday gathering in the same home where she was raising her son. The ordinary details matter because they remind us what was actually taken. Not just life in the abstract, but routines, plans, messages unsent, toys left where a toddler dropped them, a place at the table that would never be filled again. Talen's presence changes the emotional temperature of the case in a way that is impossible to ignore. He was 2, still at the age where the world is mostly immediate, mostly trust. The search for him transformed the case from an apartment investigation into a citywide emergency. Helicopters overhead, alerts sent out, officers moving from hallways to shorelines, then the recovery, then the silence that follows when hope has nowhere left to go. Even years later, that part of the story remains the one that many people in St. Petersburg cannot shake. The media coverage, while significant locally, never settled into the kind of nonstop national spotlight that defines the most famous cases. That matters too. Some cases become spectacles. Others remain close to the communities that have to live with them. This one stayed rooted in Tampa Bay, reporting courtroom updates and public records, which means much of what exists about it comes not from dramatic retellings, but from affidavits, hearing coverage, and testimony. In some ways, that makes it harder to tell. In other ways, it makes it more important to tell carefully. And careful is exactly what the legal process demands now. Competency is not a side issue here. It is the threshold issue. Before guilt or innocence can be judged in court, the system has to determine whether the accused can understand what is happening and participate in a meaningful way. That can frustrate families. It can feel like delay piled on top of grief. But it is also one of the structural rules that keeps the justice process from collapsing under emotion alone. In a case this devastating, procedure can feel cold. But procedure is also what keeps the foundation from cracking. Still, there is no procedure that can restore what was lost. No hearing that returns Pashun to her family. No ruling that returns Talen to the arms that carried him. The law can sort evidence, it can test claims, it can impose punishment. What it cannot do is reverse the empty space left behind in apartments, in family photo albums, in contact lists where a name remains but the number will never answer again. What remains then is the shape of the case itself. A birthday gathering that looked ordinary from the outside. A late evening departure captured on surveillance, fresh wounds, a home turned into a scene of devastation, a child missing, a shoreline search, a recovery from the water, a vehicle in the Gulf, an arrest from a hospital bed, years of competency hearings, families speaking from opposite sides of the same abyss. It is one of those cases where the facts do not simply sit still, they echo. They force you to revisit the sequence again and again, each time noticing a different seam. That may be the most unsettling part of all. Not just what happened, but how close it stood to normal right up until it was not. A birthday, guests, food on a table, a toddler moving through the room, a family home. Then in the span of hours, a total collapse. When people talk about warning signs after the fact, it is often because hindsight imposes order on chaos. But in real time, the signals are rarely so clear. Stress looks like stress. Withdrawal looks like fatigue. Irritability looks like another bad day. The structure does not announce itself while it is being built. And that is why cases like this stay with people. because they expose how fragile ordinary life can be, how quickly a familiar room can become unrecognizable, how the systems around a person, schools, jobs, hospitals, relationships, can all register strain without ever fully stopping the collapse, and how, after everything, the surviving families are left to do the hardest work of all, carrying memory through a process that moves far slower than grief. In the end, this story is not defined only by the questions still unanswered in court. It is also defined by the life Pashun was trying to build, the child she loved, the family that came looking when silence felt wrong, and the long legal shadow that followed. The official version may one day be finalized by verdict, sentence, and appellate record. But even then, the human structure underneath it will remain more complicated than any summary can hold. And when you step back and look at it, piece by piece, you start to see the structure behind it all. The small moments, the ignored warnings, the decisions that did not seem important at the time. All of it stacked together like bricks until something finally gives. This has been Killer Constructions. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.